guys, this is Mrs. Foy, and this is a screencast for the second part of the digestive system lecture. If you are watching the screencast, you're probably in my class. If you are not and you would like access to this presentation, just contact me and I will share it with you. So we've already talked about the alimentary canal and the fact that the digestive system is basically one long tube that has accessory organs. This is an example of an organ, the spleen, that is not part. It is not part of the digestive system. But it is in the abdominal cavity. And so that's why we're just going to talk about it very quickly. When you do your dissection, you will see that it's kind of right on the same side of the body as the stomach. And as I said, it is in the abdominal cavity. And the spleen has functions that really has nothing to do with digestion. It is a part of the immune system. It produces lymphocytes that aid our immune system, which produce antibodies. It can remove old and damaged red blood cells. It acts as a reservoir of blood in times of shock or hemorrhage. And it preserves iron during filtration, which is important for the synthesis of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein that actually carries oxygen for us. And so this next video was made by the medical school students, I think at Harvard, and you can see I've got the URL for you right here. It is so funny. So I would suggest that you watch it. What does the spleen do? It's a little spoof on what the spleen does. And remember, the spleen is not part of the digestive system, but it is in the abdominal cavity. So that's why we're giving it a little nod to the spleen in this presentation. So guys, we're going to continue on talking about the small intestine. Remember that we talked about the duodenum in our last lecture, and the duodenum is the mixing bowl of the digestive system. And so now we're going to talk about the jejunum. And the jejunum is the middle section of the small intestine. It is by far the longest part of the digestive system, about 8.2 feet in humans. It is the location of most of the chemical digestion and the nutrient absorption in the body. And because of that, it has some structures that are going to increase surface area. These are going to increase surface area for diffusion and absorption. And so we're going to take a look at what those look like in just a second. So here's a picture of the small intestine. And I want to point out to you here, this is the, you can see the red is going to be blood vessels that are delivering oxygenated blood to the cells of the intestines. But the deoxygenated blood actually takes a detour through something called the hepatic portal vein. So all of the blood with the nutrients that have been absorbed are going to go to the hepatic portal vein. The hepatic portal vein goes to the liver, and the liver has the first crack at detoxifying things that have been absorbed in our digestive system. But if we looked at the inside, the lumen of our digestive system, we would see that there are all of these folds in the lining of the small intestine, and that gives us a clue that there is a lot of absorption that goes on in here. And in each of the individual villi, you can see that there's a little finger called a lacteal, and this is going to be important for the absorption of fats. And we have our capillary beds. And if we looked at each one of these individual cells, we could see that the cell itself, so these are simple columnar cells, simple columnar epithelium, we can see that the top, the surface area of those are even have an increase in the surface area, and that's what we call microvilli. So we can see that the the whole function of this small intestine, this specifically the jejunum, is for absorption. So the last part of the small intestine is called the ileum. The ileum is about 11 feet long, so this is very, very long. I think I said erroneously that the jejunum was the longest. So the ileum is the longest, and it ends at what we call the ileocecal valve. The ileocecal valve is a sphincter. It's a muscular valve that controls the flow of the digestive material from the ileum into the large intestine. And the large intestine is the next section we're going to talk about. So here we have the whole small intestine. We've got the duodenum, we've got the jejunum, and now we've got the ileum. So the ileum, the end of the ileum, is going to go into the large intestine or the colon. And you can see that this part of the large intestine is called the cecum. It's kind of the blind sac. So if you're coming out of the ileum and you were to turn left, that would be the cecum. And you can see this little thing right here. This is actually the appendix. I think I have a better picture of it in a minute. So this is the ileocecal sphincter right here that is going to control material coming from the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine, into the large intestine or colon. So in the ileum, this is the last chance to absorb any nutrients. This is also the absorption of our vitamin B. And as I said, this valve is going to produce contents from the large intestine going back up into the ileum, and it controls the release of the material going into the large intestine. So just to summarize all the functions of the small intestine, we have intestinal secretions. So these are materials that go from the cells into the lumen of the digestive system itself. We have watery intestinal juices. About 2 liters per day enter the intestinal lumen. So that's a lot. 2 liters. Think of a 2-liter soda. That's a lot of moisture. We have moistening chyme. We have the assistance of buffering acids. Remember, this is the digestive food that we talk about coming out of the stomach. We have assistance in buffering the acids that have come from the acid part of the digestion in the stomach. We have digestive enzymes and the production of digestion in the solution. So these digestive enzymes are in those secretions. We also have intestinal movement. So the chyme arrives in the duodenum, and we have weak peristaltic contractions. Remember, with the longitudinal and circular smooth muscle that are going to move it slowly through. And this is all smooth muscle, so it's not part of our voluntary control. Through the digestive system. So we have absorption occurring there. It's not under the central nervous system control. In other words, it is not something that we can voluntarily control. It is, in fact, our parasympathetic stimulation that controls peristalsis. So instead of our fight or flight part of our autonomic nervous system, this is the chill part of our autonomic nervous system. So coordination of secretion and absorption. So in the small intestine, it takes about 5 hours for the materials to go from the duodenum to the end of the ileum, but that really depends on the type of food that you're ingesting. The movement of the intestinal tissue increases the absorptive effectiveness. So we want to stir and mix the intestinal contents, and that's what peristalsis helps to do. And we are constantly changing the environment around these epithelial cells that are doing the absorption into the bloodstream. So at this point, you might want to pause the video. Some of these questions actually have to do with questions from part 1 of the digestive system, which you can also watch on YouTube. But pause the video just for a second and see if you can answer all of these summary questions. All right, the large intestine or the colon has three major sections. So we're going to see, so here's our ileum coming in here through the ileocecal valve. This is our cecum. This is a lot larger in animals that eat more plant materials than we do. This is our appendix, we'll talk about in just a minute. But the three major parts of the colon are the ascending colon, so material goes this way, the transverse colon, the descending colon, then we have a little S-shaped here, part of the colon that's called the sigmoid colon, and then we have the rectum, and then the outer opening is called the anus. So again, these are the three parts of the colon: ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid, rectum, and anus. This little part, the appendix right here, I think I have a little better picture of that in the next slide. Let's see. So the large intestine is horseshoe shaped, so it's ascending, transverse, descending, and then a little sigmoid, and then out. It goes all the way from the end of the ileum to the anus. It lies inferior to the stomach and the liver. It frames the small intestine, so the small intestine would be all in here, all coiled up in here. It's also called the large bowel. It is about 5 feet long and about 3 inches wide. So the major function of the large intestine is the reabsorption of water. And that's really important because we know that a lot of water is involved for the passage of material and the digestion of material. And if we were to eliminate all of the water that is in our intestinal tract, we would dehydrate very quickly. So we want to reabsorb the water. We want to compact the intestinal contents into fecal material. We want to absorb some important vitamins that are produced by bacteria that live commensally with us in our large intestine. This is specifically vitamin K. And this is also the storage of fecal material prior to defecation. Okay, good. I thought I had a better picture of the appendix. So here's the appendix here. This is the cecum that is cut open. Here's the ileocecal valve. So the appendix is also called the villiform appendix, and it is a slender hollow appendage about 4 inches long, and it is mostly dominated by lymphoid tissue. Sometimes it can get infected, and that would be an emergency surgery called an appendectomy to get that appendix out because we wouldn't want it to burst. That could cause an infection in our abdominal cavity. The cecum, as we said, is a end of a blind sac that receives material arriving from the ileum, and that is a lot larger in animals that have ingest more plant material than we do. So the rectum is the last part of the large intestine, the digestive system. So it's about 6 inches, and it's an expandable organ for the temporary storage of fecal material. The movement of fecal material into the rectum triggers the urge to defecate, and there are some sphincters here that we learn voluntary control over when we are potty trained. And we can learn to close this off, and then we can relax that and have a bowel movement. The anus is the exit of the anal canal. It's the end, and it has keratinized epidermis like the skin. So it is this keratinized is kind of a waterproofing material that makes the epidermis a little tougher. So what are feces made of? Well, feces are about 75% water and 25% solid matter. This is the undigested. Food material that we have not absorbed. The solid matter is dead bacteria, fiber, which is, like we said, undigested food material, cholesterol and other fats, dead cells, and minerals. The color is due to old bile, and remember that bile is material that is secreted from the gallbladder that helps us to emulsify fat. The bacteria in our large intestine are going to feed on the indigestible carbohydrates. And this is a good thing because a lot of these guys produce vitamins for us. But part of the side effect of that is that in their metabolism, they can produce some intestinal gas. And that is flatulence or intestinal gas. So, what exactly is constipation? So, there's a couple different things that can cause constipation. There's not any one thing that can cause it. Um, if we don't drink enough water, then we can have the water is going to be removed, and so the stool in here can be very hard, and that is uncomfortable. But we need some undigested um, uh, foodstuffs like cellulose that cannot be digested. So plant materials that have this cellulose, you may remember from biology, is what produces the cell wall. And the strings on celery, for example, would be an example of cellulose. So we need to have some parts of our diet being high in this undigested food material because the peristalsis that occurs in our large intestine needs to kind of push against something. And this fiber, this bulk, helps to move the fecal material through our large intestine and helps it from getting kind of stuck. And when that happens, it can get hard and very uncomfortable, and that is what constipation is. I want to take just a minute to talk about two diseases that are becoming more and more known in this part of the century, and those are inflammatory bowel diseases. They're both Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. This is different than irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. IBS is irritable bowel syndrome, and this is a non-inflammatory disorder. This is more periods of constipation and can be some periods of diarrhea as well. This isn't very well understood, but irritable bowel is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And these are very similar diseases. Crohn's disease can be anywhere in the digestive system. Ulcerative colitis is confines itself mostly to the colon, to the large intestine. And these diseases, we don't really know why they happen. We think that there may be an autoimmune component to this, but for some reason, a person's immune response actually begins to attack their intestines, and it can cause bleeding and inflammation and pain and can actually destroy the tissue. So this is a picture of a normal intestine. So this is a picture of a fiber optic little tube that is put in during a colonoscopy to take a look at, and this is healthy tissue, and this is somebody's colon who has IBD. So you can see that it is bleeding, it is ulcerated, it is very painful. There's a lot of mucus and inflammation, and the person that has IBD is in a lot of discomfort and pain. And if the disease is not held in control by medication, we don't have a cure for either one of these diseases. And sometimes the medications don't work so well either. But if they are not held in control, then a person is going to have surgery to remove the sick part of their intestine. So if somebody has ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease in their large intestine, sometimes this has to be removed. And sometimes this happens if somebody has a severe injury, abdominal injury, or if they have cancer. But what doctors can do, you can live without a large intestine. There are some complications, but people have learned to live with this. And what they do is they take the end of the ileum and they make a little opening in the abdominal wall called a stoma. And so what happens is the person then has a removable bag that they can glue to their skin, kind of covers like this. And that bag can be emptied. There's a little way to open it up down here. And when the person needs to empty their bag, they can go to a restroom and empty that bag. And so the fecal material, it would be, it's not really fecal material, it's more liquidy, undigested material, because remember the large intestine is where feces are actually compacted and stored. So this would be more liquid material that is coming out of here. And the person would need to change their bag every maybe 3 days or so. We also have some advances for people with these diseases and others, that sometimes surgeons can make an internal pouch in the person, kind of folding over the ileum and sewing it together to make an internal reservoir for this material, that can be emptied then just the way a person would going to the restroom, going to the bathroom, and releasing those sphincter muscles and going to the bathroom. So one of the things that a gastroenterologist would do is they would want to check your colon for a bunch of different reasons. And so that's called a colonoscopy. And a colonoscopy is something that every person should have after the age of 50. So what happens is the person goes through a prep, and the prep is not so pleasant. You drink a bunch of stuff that makes you go to the bathroom and gives you diarrhea for a while and kind of cleans out your large intestines so that the physician can look with the scope that they put up here. And they give you a sedative, and then they pass this small fiber optic tube up the digestive tract, and they can take a look at your digestive system all the way up to the ileum. And they can look for things like evidence of disease or evidence of cancer. So colon cancer, we see about 93,000 new cases of colon cancer just this year in the United States alone. 1 out of 20 people will get it in their lifetime. And colon cancer, one of the things that's good about colon cancer, it is relatively slow growing. You can see the 5-year survival rate for colon cancers found at the local stage is about 90% survival rate. So that's why people have these colonoscopies. And what happens is that this little fiber optic tube here, the physician can see these little things called polyps. And sometimes these polyps are just the beginning stages of cancer, and they can actually remove those polyps, you can see with this instrument right there. And so it prevents surgery, and very important for people to have the screening, because colon cancer, when it is caught early, is highly survivable. The problem with colon cancer is when it is not caught right away. So later stages of colon cancer, you can see it's more evasive. It actually gets into the wall of the large intestine itself, and it can metastasize. It can spread to other organs through the lymphatic system and the blood system. And so the idea is you really need to take a look. The doctor needs to take a look at what your intestine looks like. But because it takes many years for these to grow, people at the age of 50, unless you have a family history of colon cancer earlier, you probably won't need to have a colonoscopy until you are 50. But it is very important. We don't want to wait too long, because there are no symptoms. No symptoms when the early stages of colon cancer are growing. And so that's why it's really important to have a colonoscopy, so that these can be seen and removed. So that's the end of the digestive system lecture, part 2. You might want to pause this and make sure you can answer these summary questions, and I will see you in class. Thanks.